Alright guys, welcome back again. This is Josh with CodeFrag, and today we are going to make our very first app that we will actually get to code together. So that is exciting. As always, I've just got our standard project, the one we made in the very first video together, and we're going to take it from this boring welcome to React Native sample app to a equally boring contact app. And the idea behind the application we're going to make today is we're going to learn about how to use a ListView data source, and how to render rows and do some styling. And ultimately what we're going to have is just a couple of contact cards with some random information that you can scroll up and down through. We won't be editing, we won't be adding any new ones. It's going to be static data, but the whole idea here is to teach a little bit of styling and a little bit of how ListView works. So let's go ahead and get started. And to do that, we're going to, I'm going to take this comment out of here. To do that, we're going to add in the components that we're going to need. In this case, we are going to need the ListView to do any work with ListView. So yeah, that's that. Next, we're going to go ahead and get rid of all of this JSX in our return function, and we are going to add in our data source. So we're going to have a const, and we're going to call it ds. That's just what I call it because that's what I learned. And it's going to be ListView.DataSource. Now, the React Native ListView data source requires that we pass a function to it that is what is called row has changed, and that function has to contain the logic to determine if a row has changed. So if you've ever worked with any kind of sorting functions or anything like that, then you should know basically what this is. And what it'll do is anytime a new row is added, or modified of course, it will compare the two rows, and if the row has changed, which is to say if this function returns true, then sorting will change based on the result. So, you know, I'm just doing it really simply here. Row 1 and row 2 is an anonymous function. I should say a fat arrow function, and it says if row 1 is not equal to row 2, then it'll just return true. And then if it is the same, then it'll return false, and no change will be made to the actual ListView data source itself. Okay, so inside of our constructor, we're going to do what we always have to do, which is call super, and then we are going to set our initial state. Our initial state is going to include a data source, and our data source is going to be ds.cloneWithRows. Now what that does is it takes the ListView data source that we made here, clones it with the data that we're going to provide in here. At the moment, I'm just going to provide an empty array because I don't actually want any data to be shown in the ListView just yet. Okay, let's move down to our render function, and we're going to start writing out the JSX to return on screen. Okay, so we're going to wrap the whole thing in a view like we usually do, and the reason for that is so that we can nest components and just have a generally more control over where certain options, certain properties will go. Okay, so you can see I've got this red error here, and the issue with that is that I've got a semicolon here inside the state object, which is just absolutely wrong. So now that I've removed that, we get our nice blank screen, and that's all hunky-dory. Alright, so for our top level view, I am going to provide a manual style of Flex 1. If you don't know how Flex works, that's okay. I will do a whole tutorial on how Flex works, but just to give you a very short example, let's do this. Border width 2. Okay, now you can see that you have a thick border there at the top, and it looks like it's just a top border, but what it actually is all of the borders, because this particular view is very small because it has nothing in it. So if we were to put a text element in here and say LOL, because this is a funny view, then you'll see that that text element is wrapped by that view, which now has that border. Now, our top level container typically would want to fill the entire usable area, and that's what flex1 does. Okay, so let's put that border width back in there now that we've added the flex1 property, and you can see that the border wraps the entire screen. So the way flex works, like I said, will be explained in greater detail later, but it essentially just does a lot of the I don't want to say guesswork, a lot of the math for you. Okay, so again, typically your top level view will have a property of flex1, a style property of flex1, and that it'll take up all of the space that it can. Now, I am actually going to go ahead and add another component up here, which is going to be status bar. You won't be able to see it in the simulator because you don't have the status bar here, but on your actual device, you've got that. Typically this will say back if you came from another program, but it'll also have your data, your company, your Wi-Fi, the time, and like your battery. And so what I like to do is remove that, and you can do that a number of ways, but the way that's cross-platform compatible is to use the status bar component and simply provide hidden. Now, hidden is shorthand for hidden equals true. Okay, but if you supply a hidden prop, which is what these are, anything after the name of the component is a prop or property, by merely supplying hidden, the interpreter will know that what you mean is to set it to hidden. Okay, so now our status bar will not show on the iOS device that we're going to test. Now, the next component and sort of the brains/heart of this operation is going to be our list view. And a list view is a great scrolling sort of content container that allows us to customize both, what data is shown and also how it is shown. But generally, it manages things like sorting for you. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to have our list source. We're going to supply a property of Datasource, which is going to be this.state.datasource. And we are also going to supply render row. Now, what render row is, the property wants to know, how do you want this list view to render the content? And we have a couple of ways of achieving this. The first way to achieve this is to simply make an anonymous function in here of, let's just call it row data, and then make a fat arrow function which will return, let's do some text here and say row data. Now, of course, because row data is a JavaScript object or variable, we need to wrap it in curly braces. And just to demonstrate how that works, I'm going to put something in here like hey, and then you'll see that render row gets called. It passes in row data, which is data from the data source, and then that gets returned through this line of code here. So if I were to have another thing of text that said text maybe, then I would have, boom, I'd have two. And because, like I said, it's scrollable, I can scroll up and down, and if there was more data and it happened to go down far enough to be clipped off screen, I could scroll through that data. Okay. Now, for small amounts of data, it might not be bad to go ahead and just do the render row function inline. The way that I prefer to do it is to pass an actual function. So what we're going to do is pass the name of a function, which will be render row, and then we will go ahead and make said function, which will of course take an argument of row data. And again, row data is going to be a single piece of data within our data source. Okay, so render row will be called once with hey, and then it will be called again with text. So if we just go ahead and do the same thing here, we'll do text, and then we'll type in render data, and then slash text, and refresh, then we get the same result, except we've extracted how the render row works and put it into its own function outside of the render method. Okay, so how we're going to go ahead and continue from here is we're going to build out our data structure. And what that is going to consist of is a couple of objects. We'll start with just two for now, and they need to contain some data. So let's give it a key of name and a value of Joe Rogan, because Joe Rogan, you crazy? Okay, whatever. We'll give him a number of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. Let's see what else. Maybe an email, joerogan@fearfactor.com, And lastly, maybe an address of 123 Easy Street. He seems like a guy who would live on Easy Street, right? And then we will copy that and paste it into this other object. And what we're going to do is go back and change the info because, what's the point of having two of the same contact, right? So let's change this to Bill Gates. He actually has 7891, if you can believe that. Pretty crazy, right? Same number, so close, right? So he's going to be, Bill at Microsoft.com. I assume it's Bill at Microsoft.com. Who knows, though, right? And his address will be, 1000 Infinity Loop, which I think is, or 1000 Infinite Loop. I think it's actually Apple's address, but whatever. Okay, so now we're getting this error here, and the reason that we're getting that is because it says objects are not valid as a React child. So what's happening here is this row data is actually a representation of this entire object and not just one property in that object. So what I'm going to do is use dot notation to specify a specific property within that object, and now as you can see, those values are being rendered onto screen properly. So let's just add a little bit of formatting and we will go from there. We're going to start by changing our return statement to some parentheses so that we can have slightly more control, and we will pass a style object. Normally I might make this into its own sort of style down there in the const styles down here, but just for the sake of getting the styles out here and making it look good quickly, we'll just go ahead and write it here. So let's see here. We're going to set our border width to 2. By default, the color is black and the type is solid, so I don't need to change that. Align items. This is another flex property, and basically what we're saying is, our top to bottom, our vertical alignment for our, the children of this view node should be center, and our justify content, which is our horizontal alignment of the children to this particular view, needs to also be center. Okay, so as you can see, we've got this sort of black stripe up here, and that's once again because we don't actually have any data here. So we're going to fill this in with just a couple of text nodes, and what I'm going to do here, just to make this go by faster, is just copy and paste one for every key value pair that we have. So we're going to do row data dot name, and then we are going to, let's just copy that real quick and paste it, do a quick refresh. Now we've got an issue here. As you can see, it says expected corresponding JSX closing tag for text on line 42. Now the reason is right here. Actually, you see that we're missing the less than sign in order to make that slash text tag relevant. So there we go. Now as you can see, it's Joe Rogan over and Bill Gates all over, and the reason for that is we have .name everywhere. So we're going to change name to number in this case, email in this case, and address in this case. Now we get this nice sort of contact card look here, and of course it is the data relevant to each person. And of course, like I said before, we can scroll. So we're gonna put a little space there just because I don't like it being bunched up like that. So there we go, a margin of 5 units on the top, and maybe even let's maybe even put let's change the width a little bit. Let's do width, and we'll do say 80%. So we'll have 20% of the screen on the left and right side. Excuse me, you can't use width. You can't use percentages. There is actually a library that allows you to use percentages in React Native, and that's my fault for not having it included. So we're going to pretend like that didn't just happen and move on from here. Okay, so let's go ahead and just copy this this data structure a couple of times so that you can see how the scrolling works. And we need to go ahead and make sure that we have commas after each one, which of course we do not. So let's go ahead and add those. It's just a copy and paste error on my part, not something you may not run into that issue. Go ahead and refresh. Right now you can see we've got these contact cards here. You got your name, number, email, and address, and it is just the same data repeated over and over. But additionally, because of the way that the data structure or the ListView data source works, we are able to scroll through the content and provide a much easier way of looking at all this data instead of trying to squish it all onto the screen. So once again, we're missing a comma. I only refreshed it because I wanted to know what line it was missing on. There it is. Now we've got twice as many contacts, and we can scroll through them smoothly, even on the simulator. And as you know, the simulator doesn't necessarily work as well as the device typically. So that's the list view, and we also used the status bar to make sure the status bar remained hidden. That is, we used the view, we used the text components, and we also focused mainly on the ListView data source. We also used a little bit of JSON in this. If you recognize that, then awesome. And what we're going to do in these next couple of videos is we're going to definitely make some more advanced apps. I understand that this is somewhat boring, I guess. The data is static, and there's not a whole lot of pretty styling to it, if you will. But it does show how ListView works. It shows a bit about how the data source for ListView works, and I'm trying to provide a foundation for how everything is going to function before we actually get into the more difficult stuff. But the more difficult stuff is certainly coming. And of course, if you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. Please hit that like button. And of course, if you have any questions, comment below. You'll probably see that questions have been asked on my previous videos, and I have done everything I could to answer them. So you can also consider going to patreon.com/programming and becoming a patron, and that that really helps me out because it sort of helps me make more time to make these videos. So once again, subscribe. This is Josh from CodeFrag, and thanks guys.